In the winter of 1881, 17 men vanished from the small town of Wickfield. All of them had one thing in common. They were last seen entering Silas Grim's barber shop on Elm Street. The townspeople whispered that once you sat in Silas's chair, you never truly left. Some said the floor beneath his shop had strange stains that couldn't be washed away. Others swore they heard muffled screams coming from the basement at night. But no one dared investigate, not until Elizabeth Foster's brother became the 18th man to disappear. What happened in that barbershop wasn't just murder. It was something far worse, something that defied explanation. And the truth about Silas Grim would haunt Wickfield for generations to come. The town of Wickfield wasn't much to look at in 1881. Just a cluster of buildings huddled against the harsh New England winter, surrounded by dense forests and steep hills. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, where secrets festered beneath polite smiles. Silas Grim arrived in September of that year. No one knew where he came from. Some said Boston. Others claimed he'd traveled from Europe. All anyone knew for certain was that he paid cash for the empty storefront on Elm Street and transformed it into a barber shop within a week. From the outside, the shop looked ordinary enough. A red and white barber pole spun lazily by the door. The windows were always clean, the floor swept. But people noticed strange things about Silas himself. He was tall and thin, with fingers that seemed too long for his hands. His face was pale and gaunt, as if he never saw the sun. But most disturbing were his eyes. Dark and sunken, they seemed to look through you rather than at you. The first man to disappear was William Hayes, the town drunk. No one thought much of it when he vanished. People assumed he'd finally moved on to another town. But then Thomas Miller, the blacksmith, went missing too. And 3 days later, so did Jonathan Pierce, the banker's son. Each man had told someone they were going for a haircut at Silas Grim's shop. None of them were ever seen again. When questioned, Silas always gave the same answer. They left satisfied with their cut. I couldn't tell you where they went after. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic. And somehow, people believed him. Or pretended to. Elizabeth Foster didn't believe Silas for a second. Her brother Michael was the 18th man to vanish after visiting the barber shop. Michael wasn't the type to leave town without telling his sister. He wouldn't abandon his job at the mill or the woman he was courting. But Sheriff Adams refused to investigate. "We can't arrest a man because people choose to leave town," he told Elizabeth. "Times are hard. People move on." Elizabeth knew better. She'd seen the way Silas looked at her brother the Sunday before he disappeared, like a wolf eyeing a lamb. And she'd noticed something else, something the sheriff had overlooked. Every man who vanished had something in common besides visiting Silas. They were all alone in the world, except for distant relations. No wives, no children, no one who would raise too much of a fuss if they disappeared. Except for Michael. He had Elizabeth. If you're finding this story gripping so far, make sure you subscribe to catch more tales of terror from history's darkest corners. Elizabeth wasn't wealthy or powerful. She was just a seamstress with a small room above the general store. But she was clever, and she was determined. She began watching Silas's shop, hiding across the street and observing his comings and goings. For 3 days, she saw nothing unusual. Men entered the shop. Men left the shop. Silas opened at dawn and closed at dusk. On the 4th day, however, Elizabeth noticed something odd. She counted 6 men entering the barber shop throughout the day, but only 5 leaving. That night, she saw Silas carrying a large, heavy bag to the back of his shop, struggling under its weight. He disappeared into the alley behind Elm Street, returning empty-handed 20 minutes later. Elizabeth knew she needed to see inside that shop after hours. She waited until midnight, when the town was asleep and even the tavern had gone quiet. Then she crossed the street, a small lantern in hand, and tried the back door of Silas's shop. To her surprise, it was unlocked. The main room of the barber shop looked normal in the dim light of her lantern. The barber chair stood in the center, made of polished leather with brass fittings. Mirrors lined one wall, reflecting her frightened face back at her. Combs, scissors, and straight razors were neatly arranged on a small table. But then Elizabeth noticed something strange about the floor around the barber chair. It was different from the rest. A large square section that didn't quite match. A trapdoor. With trembling hands, she found the hidden latch and pulled. The heavy wooden door lifted to reveal a steep staircase descending into darkness. Elizabeth knew she should get the sheriff, despite his reluctance. But what if Silas returned? What if her brother was down there, needing help? She took a deep breath and began to descend, one careful step at a time. The smell hit her first. A terrible, sickening stench that made her gag and cover her mouth with her handkerchief. Then came the sounds, faint whimpering like wounded animals. And finally, as she reached the bottom of the stairs, her lantern revealed the truth. The basement was vast, extending not just beneath the barber shop, but under the neighboring buildings as well. And it was filled with chairs, not ordinary chairs, but bizarre contraptions of wood, metal, and leather. Each one held a man, strapped down at the wrists, ankles, and across the chest. Some of the men Elizabeth recognized. William Hayes, Thomas Miller. And there, in the chair farthest from the stairs, was her brother Michael. His eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. His hair and beard had been completely shaved off, and his head was wrong somehow. There was a thin metal seam running across his scalp, as if the top of his skull had been removed and replaced. All the men had the same seam. All sat motionless except for occasional twitches and spasms. And all were connected by thin copper tubes to a massive machine that dominated the center of the basement. A tangle of pipes, valves, and glass containers filled with swirling, glowing fluid. Elizabeth stifled a scream and rushed to her brother, dropping her lantern in her haste. "Michael! Michael, it's me! Can you hear me?" She shook him gently, then more forcefully, but his expression never changed. "They can't hear you," said a soft voice behind her. "Not anymore." Elizabeth whirled around. Silas Grim stood at the foot of the stairs, a strange smile on his thin lips. In his hand was a barber's razor, the blade catching the light from her fallen lantern. "What have you done to them?" Elizabeth demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Silas gestured to the machine with his free hand. "I've improved them, freed them from the prison of individual thought. They're part of something greater now, a collective mind. My creation." "You're insane," Elizabeth whispered. "No, I'm a visionary," Silas replied. His eyes gleamed with fervor. "Each brain contributes something unique to the whole. Memories, skills, ideas. Together, they're helping me solve the greatest puzzle of all, immortality." Elizabeth looked back at her brother, at the seam across his head, and understood with horror what Silas had done. He'd opened their skulls, connected their brains to his machine, turning them into components of some monstrous experiment. "You won't get away with this," she said, edging toward the stairs. "People will come looking for me." Silas's smile widened. "I certainly hope so. I've been wanting a female brain to add to my collection. The feminine perspective could be just what my creation needs to achieve the final breakthrough." He moved with unexpected speed, lunging toward Elizabeth with his razor. She dodged, but the blade caught her sleeve, slicing through fabric and skin. She cried out in pain but kept moving, scrambling up the stairs with Silas close behind. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter in this terrifying tale. Elizabeth burst into the barber shop and ran for the front door, but found it locked. She could hear Silas climbing the stairs from the basement, unhurried, confident. She looked around desperately for a weapon and saw his collection of tools. She grabbed the largest pair of scissors just as Silas emerged from the trap door. "There's nowhere to go, Miss Foster," he said calmly. "Why not accept your destiny? Your brother's mind is still in there, in a sense. You could be with him again, part of the same greater consciousness." "You're not taking my brain," Elizabeth said, brandishing the scissors. Silas sighed. So many of them fought at first. Your brother did too, but in the end, they all sat in my chair. He gestured to the barber chair, and Elizabeth felt a strange compulsion to sit in it. Her legs took a step forward without her willing it, then another. The scissors suddenly felt heavy in her hand. "What are you doing to me?" she gasped, fighting against the invisible force pulling her toward the chair. "A simple hypnotic technique," Silas explained, "enhanced by certain modifications I've made to myself over the years. My voice contains frequencies that affect the human mind. It's how I convinced all those men to stay still while I opened their skulls." Elizabeth felt her grip on the scissors weakening. Her mind was growing foggy. All she wanted was to sit in that comfortable chair and let Silas take care of her. Wasn't that what barbers did? They took care of people. "No!" With a tremendous effort of will, she tightened her grip on the scissors and lunged at Silas, aiming for his throat. He blocked her easily, twisting her wrist until she dropped her weapon. Then he pushed her toward the chair with surprising strength. "Extraordinary," he murmured as she struggled. "Your willpower is remarkable. Your brain will be a valuable addition indeed." Elizabeth fought with everything she had, but Silas forced her into the chair and quickly secured leather straps around her wrists and ankles. She screamed, hoping someone in town would hear, but Silas only smiled. "The walls are insulated," he told her. "Another modification I made when I purchased this building. No one can hear you. Now shall we begin?" He turned to his tool table and picked up a strange device, part razor, part saw, with a small crank on one side. "This will only hurt for a moment," he promised. "Then you'll be part of something wonderful." As Silas approached with his terrible tool, Elizabeth noticed something he hadn't. In their struggle, they had bumped into the small table by the barber chair, knocking over a bottle. Clear liquid was spreading across the floor, its sharp smell cutting through the fear clouding her mind. Alcohol, highly flammable. Elizabeth's eyes darted to her fallen lantern, still burning on the floor near the trap door. If she could somehow knock it over, into the puddle of alcohol. Silas followed her gaze and understood her plan. "Clever," he said, stepping carefully around the spill. "But futile." He reached out to push the lantern aside with his foot. In that moment, Elizabeth summoned her remaining strength and rocked the heavy barber chair violently to one side. It tipped over with her still strapped to it, crashing into Silas's legs. He stumbled, arms windmilling, and fell directly onto the lantern. The glass shattered. The flame caught the alcohol. Fire erupted across the floor, racing toward the walls and the dropped bottle, which exploded in a ball of blue flame. Silas screamed as his clothes caught fire. He rolled across the floor, trying to extinguish the flames, but only spread them further. The fire reached the trapdoor and began consuming the dry wooden stairs leading to the basement. Elizabeth struggled against her bonds as the barber shop filled with smoke. The leather strap on her right wrist had loosened when the chair fell. She pulled and twisted until her hand slipped free, then quickly unbuckled the other restraints. Staggering to her feet, she saw Silas still thrashing on the floor, engulfed in flames. Beyond him, the fire was spreading rapidly, feeding on the ancient wooden building. The trapdoor had become a pit of fire, cutting off any chance of reaching the basement and the men trapped there, including her brother. "Michael!" she cried, lurching toward the inferno. A burning beam crashed down, blocking her path. The heat was unbearable now, the smoke choking. With a sob of despair, Elizabeth turned and smashed a window with a chair, then climbed through the broken glass onto the street. Behind her, the barber shop was fully ablaze, flames shooting from every window. The fire spread to neighboring buildings as townspeople emerged in their nightclothes, shouting in alarm. A bucket brigade formed, but it was too late. The entire block was burning. Elizabeth watched in horror, knowing her brother and all of Silas's victims were trapped in the basement. They would burn, or worse. That terrible machine might keep them alive somehow, suffering endlessly beneath the ruins. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of Elm Street, the sheriff found Elizabeth sitting on the ground, staring at the destroyed barber shop. When she told him her story, about the basement and the machine and the men with open skulls, he assumed she was in shock, traumatized by the fire and the loss of her brother. No bodies were ever recovered from the ruins, not even Silas Grim's. The basement, if it had ever existed, had collapsed, burying any evidence of what had happened there. The fire was ruled an accident, and the town of Wickfield slowly rebuilt and tried to forget. But Elizabeth Foster never forgot. For years afterward, she insisted that sometimes, at night, she could hear a faint humming coming from beneath the ruins of the barber shop, the sound of a machine still running, still keeping those poor men in a state of half-life. Most people dismissed her as mad with grief, but there were strange stories in Wickfield in the years that followed. People reported seeing men who looked like the missing walking the streets at night, hairless, expressionless men who vanished when approached. Children claimed to hear whispers coming from the storm drains, begging for release. And every few years, a traveler would come to town, always tall and thin, with long fingers and sunken eyes. They never stayed long, but after each visit, someone would disappear. Elizabeth Foster died in 1926, an old woman still haunted by what she'd seen in the basement of Silas Grim's barber shop. On her deathbed, she made her niece promise to keep watch over the ruins on Elm Street, to make sure nothing was ever built there again. That promise was kept for generations. Even now, the empty lot remains, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a high fence. The people of modern-day Wickfield avoid it, though few remember why. But last month, a developer purchased the land. Construction is scheduled to begin next week. Workers have already reported strange sounds as they survey the site, a faint humming from deep underground. And yesterday, the foreman disappeared. His crew found his hard hat abandoned beside a hole in the ground, a hole that no one remembers digging, a hole that seems to lead down into darkness. Some say if you stand at the edge of that hole and listen carefully, you can hear the snipping of scissors and the stropping of a razor. And sometimes, just sometimes, a soft voice will float up from the depths, asking if you'd like a haircut.